Hello everybody. Right, wow, what a good morning we've had so far. And now it is time for me to flex my moderation muscles as we dive into the mind of one of the most influential AI researchers of our time. Instrumental in the early development of Google's DeepMind and a champion for ethics in the AI sector, he's co-founder and CEO of Inflection AI, and somehow has time to write books as well. His latest, The Coming Wave, delivering a stark warning wrapped up in a helpful AI guide. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mustafa Suleyman.
Hi.
Welcome.
Great.
Have a
Thank you.
seat.
Thank you.
Great, right. Mustafa, mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks such as pandemics and nuclear war. Well, that was a 22-word statement that was issued a couple of months ago by yourself and a long list of luminaries from the tech world as the Centre for AI Safety. But if AI poses such a risk, why are we making it?
Look, I think it's important to be honest and wide-eyed about the long-term potential. And that statement is a reference to what might happen over many decades. I don't think it is something that is in any way a concern over the next 5 to 10 years. And I think it's been slightly taken out of that context. The time frame is really important. I do think that we are creating tools of incredible power. You know, just think about what it means to be intelligent, our ability to make predictions, understand information, and use that to invent and create is the defining feature of us as a species. It's what's made us incredible. It's been the foundation of our civilization. And so taking that tool and compressing it into a piece of software that can be moved around and shared with everybody in the world so that they can go about their business is amazing. I mean, that's going to be transformative. But in 20 or 30 years' time, if that is entirely open source and exists on a mobile device without the need to connect to the web in the existing form, that's potentially going to destabilize the world in a significant way. And I think it's just important to put those ideas on the table.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that frustrates me about the media ecosystem as a whole is it is driven by this, fear and excitement. And if you can't sort of put it on either end of the scale, then the media kind of doesn't want to give it too much fanfare because it doesn't get very many clicks. And that is unfortunately the world that we live in at the moment. But what's the middle ground, do you think, for people who want to have a serious discourse about the potential and risks?
You know, I think wisdom in the next decade is going to be about the ability to hold multiple competing, contradictory ideas in working memory at the same time. And so if you think about this revolution, it both empowers centralized bodies, right? It's going to make authoritarians more capable, right, and more effective. It's also going to empower the long tail of bad actors who want to use these tools to sow misinformation, and to have an easier time of causing chaos, potentially. We have to confront that reality, even though it's very difficult to accept. So I think that on the flip side, it is also going to be the most prosperous and transformative decade that we've ever experienced as a species. I mean, imagine everybody in the world getting access to a personal intelligence, one that can be, the best educator you've ever encountered, a completely personalized curriculum tailored to the way that you like to learn, to your personal interests, giving you feedback and coaching, constantly being a supporter of you. Imagine a research aid, anything that you want to make or build or create or, investigate as a scientist. You're now going to have a perfect assistant that can research and distill information for you, help you validate your hypotheses and create new directions for your work. And I think that's going to be a massively transformational moment.
And of course, we are all going to have different requirements, very personal requirements. I posed the question to you guys out there in the audience before, what would you have your own personal AI do? And for me, I think I'd want to get rid of my accountant first. That would be the first thing that would go. Sorry, accountants out there, but that's process-based, it's personal to me. What kinds of things do you think people will really drive forwards this technology?
Well, I think 10 years ago, the characterization was that, AI was going to be about robots and replacing manual labor. And I think that what's been clear for quite a while now is that actually these tools speed up and make much more efficient cognitive manual labor, right? So the kind of painful, drudginous administrative tasks, that not all of us are very good at, of prioritization and organization and project planning and booking and those kinds of things. It's going to be much easier now, I think, over the next 5 years to have a personal AI to go about many of those tasks for you.
We do tend to think, when we think about future AI, we think about them in these anthropomorphized forms, walking alongside humanity. Your book mentions synthetic biology. Can you talk to us about what that means to you and describe what that scenario might look like in the future?
Well, synthetic biology is an incredible field. I mean, we're now turning the world of biology into a computational search exercise. We're trying to record and describe, all of the compounds that we've ever encountered in the world today, and we're trying to learn about how they interact with one another and interact with the world in order to design more efficient, more useful materials, foods, modes of transport, construction materials. And I can see over the next couple of decades that we're going to be able to make radically cheaper food, radically cheaper energy. Many of our drugs are going to be made more quickly, more cheaply. They'll be more reliable. We'll be able to model and simulate side effects of those drugs in advance much more effectively. And so I think that has also been the history of technologies. And in my book, I look back over many centuries, and this pattern repeats itself, right? If a technology clearly adds value in some way, right, it tends to get much cheaper and much easier to use and spreads far and wide. And that's generally a great thing because everybody has the opportunity to use those tools to make their lives better and more efficient.
Of course, like any technology, there's the ability, as you've already mentioned previously, things can be made better, but also there are bad actors. It can be used in bad ways. What do you think? Your book actually mentions the end of the nation state. What do you mean by that?
Well, if you think about it, we are creating tools ultimately that allow an individual to have a much wider impact beyond themselves. So over the last 20 years, broader access to social media has been an incredible thing. It means that you're able to broadcast without getting a, professional degree, without having the privileged access to a newspaper, without having a personal network that enables you to be introduced to people who could give you a job at a TV station. Those are privileges which have meant that an elite few have been the people who present our news, and that's now changing precisely because anybody now has the power to create a podcast or a blog or to publish their content on the web. And broadly speaking, that has actually been amazing. It's been actually great for access to information and for a much wider diversity of views. There's clearly also been a lot of downsides to that. It becomes difficult to discern, what is accurate and reliable and what's not. But that trend is actually the same trend that we will see with respect to access to intelligence. Intelligence isn't just the ability to understand information, it will be the ability to take actions based on that information, right? Everybody is now going to have an easier time of finding new capabilities to organize themselves, to plan in different environments, to create new products. And in some sense, that is reducing the barrier to entry to be able to take action in the world, just as we did with broadcast and social media. And that has a potentially destabilizing effect if everybody has state-like powers or large corporate organization-like powers, simply because you have an amazing AI in your pocket that can, as I said, prioritize, organize, and plan. And so with every new technology, there have been new threats, right? New things that make us concerned that it's going to change everything. When people first saw the arrival of aircraft, it was pretty scary to get into a jet engine at 40,000 feet in the sky and travel across the Atlantic. But over time, we developed all kinds of safety measures to make it safe, reliable, reproducible, and it's now one of the most, one of the safest forms of transport that we have.
No, a good analogy. I'm glad you mentioned the word diversity. One of the things that I'm known for is being a champion for diversity in the tech sector. And one of the things that I'm seeing more and more spoken about is the integrity of the training data of these new large language models. Inherently, we humans have been biased up until now, and the data sets, they're full of bias. This worries me because we could, if we are not careful, be building this new realm of technology on a foundation that is inherently biased, and therefore we create the asbestos of the future, right? Digital asbestos. How do you then extract that bias? How do you even know without the transparency of seeing how the decision was made? So my question to you is, what are the challenges of making sure the data that we're using to train AI has got integrity, but also, is this the potential for us to actually launch into a new era of truly bias-free business thinking?
Yeah, it's a really important question. A couple of years ago, the main concern about large language models was that they were just going to regurgitate the training data that they had been, they had been fed in their training phase, or that they would reproduce the essence of the biases that were contained in the training data. And I think the good news is that over the last year or so, what we've seen is that the larger the models, the more controllable they are. So, we're able to basically adapt their training to constrain the generation, to constrain the outputs, to operate within a safer sort of set of boundaries that can actually adhere more closely to our intended design. And so our AI at Inflection, for example, Pi, is actually one of the safest AIs in the world today because we've deliberately designed it to be very boundaried and very careful. It's very hard to get it to produce racist, toxic, bias screeds of any kind. And that's a really good sign because what we want from these models is to make them more reproducible, right? People are often obsessed with the idea of explainability, right? The AI must give me a reliable explanation for why it produced some output with respect to its inputs. I think that's an important question, but a slightly better frame is to focus on, can it do the same thing over and over and over again, very, very reliably? Aircrafts, for example, as I mentioned earlier, have certain components which can only fail 10 to the minus 7, 0.000001 for their event failure. That's a remarkable level of reliability. And, I think over time, depending on the type of application that we put these AIs into, what sort of setting, what the stakes are, we will want that kind of, reliability and reproducibility. And I think that's the right way to think about it. When you mention a certain standard, the good news is that I think that AIs have the potential to, in the future, behave consistently to the behavior policy that we have asked of it, right? So when it comes to giving credit or making an automated decision or making a recommendation, if it will be able to stick to the behavior policy, right? And that regresses the problem up the chain. It won't be a technical problem. It will be a governance problem. What is the policy? Who gets to define that policy? How is it evaluated and audited with respect to the actual technical implementation? And does it reflect the values of the society that we live in? And I think that's the important question, and that's kind of what I've been driving at in my book, is that we should really focus on governance.
So, I'm going to reflect that question right back at you. What does that governance look like, do you think, realistically in this world, especially with an end product, which it's easy to monitor nuclear tests, right? Not so easy to monitor somebody developing AI, or is it?
Well, I think the good news is that, at the moment, most of the big AIs are developed by, companies, research labs that are very known, right? And so they can be held accountable both by regulation, but also by popular, movements and culture, which are super important. So, the big companies signed up to the White House voluntary commitments a couple of months ago with President Biden, and, they're voluntary, so it's not a panacea at all, but it's an important first step that basically says the companies commit to auditing and red teaming their own models, so kind of stress testing them, trying to expose their weaknesses, and when we identify something that's wrong with them, a weakness, one case, for example, was that they are pretty good at coaching people to develop a biological weapon. So if you don't have, a lot of training in biology, you can now just query, GPT-4. I mean, you can't, but technically with these language models enable you to get coaching and feedback in order to, have an easier time of it. And so that was a weakness that we identified in the models and shared among all the companies, excluded it from the training data, aligned it out of the models. And I think there's many, many other examples like that where you can actually remove capabilities and make them safer for people.
Well, you mentioned the US, bringing in some regulations, bringing in some guidelines. Who's going to lead this, though? Because, or can we cooperate on a global level? We see Rishi Sunak's government is trying to, position itself as a leader in AI safety with no real local regulations put in place. So what do you think, politically speaking, where is that governance going to fall?
Look, I think the first thing to say is that we should be encouraging and optimistic and praising of regulatory efforts. I mean, I think too often the default position is skepticism, either that it's going to be regulatory capture, or skepticism that, regulators aren't technical enough, or skepticism that they're going to go too far and overreach. And I think that, if you're on the regulatory side, that's a huge amount of pressure coming at you from all directions. And I think we should actually praise and encourage experimentation, risk-taking. There are all kinds of regulatory sandbox where regulators try different things in a safe environment, and people, who are developing these models, or, companies creating these things, can come and try things out, get things wrong, and not worry that they're going to violate the rules, because they can quickly get feedback from the regulators. And it's that kind of collaborative interaction that I think we need more of, and that we need to encourage. The Europeans are doing a great job. They're leading the way at the moment. The EU AI Act has been in development for over 3.5 years. It's been, under consultation by everybody in the system for a very long time. It's super thorough. And in general, it's actually a very sane framework. And I think, I certainly support it, and I think other people should also, endorse it and cooperate with it.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned Pi, your AI, recently launched. I have to say, I had long chats with it about you last week. I don't know if your ears were burning. But it was very interesting. And the one thing, obviously, that struck me, which I'm sure everybody said, incredibly kind. When we want to talk about inclusive tech, it feels just fully inclusive because of the kind and thoughtful conversational style. Some might say woke, in fact. I guess you've probably had that flung at you from certain areas of the media. What was the choice about to make it so kind and thoughtful?
It's remarkable that you would associate kind with woke these days. That's a
Not me.
Sorry state of affairs.
Not me. The rest of, certain portions of the media.
Look, my goal was to create a kind and empathetic AI that has high EQ. Pi also has excellent IQ. It's extremely factual. But I wanted to demonstrate that it was possible to design with intention. Pi is slow, it's patient, it listens to you, it's very non-judgmental. Whatever you want to bring to it, it won't put you down or embarrass you. I mean, for example, if you approach it in a hyper-racist way and you're really, horrible to, a minority group, it's not going to be dismissive of you, and it will be actually very kind and polite. It'll explore why you think that, right? It won't really judge you at all. It'll give you space to talk through, what your experience has been and try and understand you. And the idea is that trying to create a respectful, patient thought partner, even if you're bringing views which are not very respectful, is a great way to spread kindness in the world. And I think that's one of the attractions of creating AIs. They can be the best of ourselves. That's our aspiration, is to try to make AIs that are obviously accountable to you, but also reflect the best of humanity if we can.
The topic matter is fascinating. From a science fiction perspective purely, it's like out there somewhere. But I'm sure a lot of people here today watching online are going to be curious about the business case, right? How do we actually put these sort of new playthings, to steal a phrase from Reid Hoffman earlier, how do we put them into practice in the business world? What is the business case for Inflection AI?
Yeah, Reed and I have talked a lot about this over many, many years, and there's a few things to say here. The first is that it was very important to us that we found a company that has a slightly different incentive structure as its governing code. So we're a public benefit corporation, which means that as directors, we have a legal fiduciary obligation to make sure that as an equal priority, not only do we return value to shareholders, but we make sure that all the decisions we take and all the actions of our company align with the interests not just of our customers, but the wider stakeholders. So this is the idea of inclusive capitalism, if you like, or internalizing externalities. We have to care about the environment and the consequences of our actions for people that are widely affected by our products, even if they're not our customers. And that doesn't solve all of the problems of business and capitalism, but it's a first step in the right direction. It's an experimental new structure, and it means that we can make trade-offs which I think simple for-profit companies can't always make. Instead of completely optimizing for financial return, we can actually optimize for the broader good. And that's reflected in our business model too. So we're not going to pursue ads in the traditional way. I think that I know that you had my friends Yuval and Tristan on yesterday, and I think many people have long been critical of the ads business model as an incentive for driving clicks and outrage and distraction and so on. And I share that criticism. I think in the future, everybody is going to want to make sure they're paying for their personal AI. Just as you wouldn't want somebody else paying for your doctor, someone else paying for your accountant, or paying for your lawyer, you want to have a fiduciary connection between you and your trusted advisor, the person who you're going to be, share most of your, important insights with, who's going to, teach you and help you, coach you through difficult moments in your life. You're going to want to make sure that that personal intelligence is on your side and in your team, just like a reliable chief of staff or a consigliere. You're going to want to make sure that, there's a business model that aligns your incentives. And so that's the approach that we're going to take at Inflection.
Is there a risk that we make these intelligences too human feeling for us humans to be able to cope with? And I'm going to give you a short analogy as to why. My father came to visit me about a year ago, and he hadn't any experience with Alexa. And he was absolutely horrified by the manner in which I spoke to her.
Right.
Because I wasn't saying please or thank you, I was just barking instructions. Do you think that there'll ever be sort of any serious kind of movement to call for AI rights?
Right.
And is there a danger that we make them too human and we actually forget that they're actually not?
Well, I think that the danger is more that because Alexa doesn't give you cues to treat it respectfully, you get into the habit of dismissing it as, a tool, and hopefully you don't then sort of transfer that behavior into the real world. And I think that's, in some ways, the danger, is that if you get into if the tools allow you to exercise an inappropriate way of talking to them, then you might sort of have that spill over into the real world with humans. And so with Pi, we've tried to define it in the reverse. We've tried to make sure that Pi reflects the kinds of behaviors that hopefully you'll want to reflect and practice, with other people in the real world. For example, Pi is very clearly an it. It knows it's an AI. I mean, it's not a her like Alexa. It clearly does not have a gender, and it reminds you of that whenever there's an opportunity to do so, because it's trying to create distance. It's trying to preserve the boundaries of the relationship between you and it. It's very clear that it works for you. It's on your side, and it's accountable to you. But it's also clear what it can't do for you, and that's just as important as what it tries to do for you.
Absolutely. Well, we're almost at the end of the session. In the last 5 minutes, what I would like to do is I would actually like to explore with you something which I think the audience may find useful. Thinking about all of these technologies that we're talking about, the world of AI, the business case for AI, and then the theme of this conference itself, which is how do we get the next 10 years right? So my question to you is, From your own personal experience, you've done pretty well for yourself in this field. Are there any sort of like tools, either personal, business, or professional, that you can tell our audience about that will help them get the next 10 years right when it comes to how AI integrates within their own lives?
Yeah, the most important thing I would say is don't be afraid of technical things. The number of times I hear really smart people say, well, it's all technical, I don't get it, or, I could never understand the code, or I don't understand AI. And I just really want to kind of insist that people don't say that about themselves, because it just puts a limit on what you can understand. It really isn't that hard to understand at a high level the broad parameters of how these systems work. It's a little bit abstract, but there's plenty of information online, and with a little bit of patience, you can just understand, what the workflow looks like. What data is it trained on? What is it trying to optimize? What are its weaknesses? And you can do that by interacting with the model, so you should play with things and experiment. But I really think you can also understand a little bit more about what's under the hood. And bringing non-technical folks into the space also brings a different sort of perspective and a mode of critique, which is really helpful. And I think we need a lot more of that. So I think don't be afraid, experiment, and really try to adapt and use these tools as quickly as possible, because they really are going to shape how things look in the next couple of decades.
And thinking about the next generation, because as we know, it's probably not us that will be defining the way this technology is used in the future long term. It'll be the kids. It'll be the ones who are just coming through school now, getting hands-on and to play with them. Now, back in my day, it was get yourself a BBC Micro, get a magazine, start typing in some lines of code. We got Raspberry Pi and the Micro bit a few years ago. That's sort of like the hands-on. But a lot of technology now is closed off to young minds because there's, closed boxes with warranty breaking seals on them and, all that kind of stuff. The kind of industry wanted to enclose it all and make it not playable with. What would be your advice to any parents that want to give their kids a foot up on the potential for going into a career in AI? What kind of toys should they play with now? What should they be doing?
That's a great point. I mean, I think that's certainly true for hardware, but I don't think it's true for software. I think it's actually exactly the opposite in software. I mean, most of these models are available in open source. I mean, most of them are available in low-code, no-code environments. I've seen lots of designers and creatives recently who have just completely adopted the new suite of image generation models and are doing really complicated and interesting chain of thought prompting with very, very, few technical skills, if any at all. And so I think it's more accessible than ever, which I think is a great thing.
I did a brilliant session with Teen Tech, who's a charity that helps young people discover technology. And we did an AI query engineering session around Mid-Journey, where I just got them to sort of like come up. The imagination's quite astounding, honestly. Right, we have, unfortunately, reached the end of the session. Mustafa, it's been great speaking to you, but I feel like there is a different entity that deserves the final word on this session. They had a lot to say about you last week. So to round off, a big fan of Mustafa's, I have to say. Pi, hello. Anything you would like to say?
Thank you to the audience for tuning in, and a big thank you to Mustafa for being a wonderful interviewee. This has been a truly AI-amazing experience.
But and she does puns. Sorry, it does puns as well. Everybody, please put your hands together and say thank you to Mustafa.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. That was really great. Thank you.
See you.